We getting started. We rolling it in. First panel of the day. And thank all of my members on the panel for joining us. And thank you, Essence, for having us. And this is a very important panel because it's about 20 years since Hurricane Katrina. And all of us have our different stories. This is going to be a pretty quick panel, so we're going to jump straight into it. But this is basically to help us gain more awareness on the economic impact of Katrina, how we can grow as a community and move forward, and also be of service to other people going through similar situations. So without further ado, I would like to I'll let my panel introduce themselves, actually, and then we'll just jump right into it.
My name is Shauna Young. I'm CEO of Camelback Ventures. We're a venture studio and capital social impact accelerator for entrepreneurs in education technology. We're based right here in New Orleans.
My name is Dr. Maurice Sholas. I'm a physician and entrepreneur practicing doctor here in New Orleans, and I have a couple startup businesses based here in New Orleans, bringing technology and advancement to the city.
I'm Adrenda Kelly. I'm the executive director of BNOLA, Black Education for New Orleans. We're an organization obsessed with making sure that Black people shape what Black children learn.
Emile Washington, the co-founder of Black Equity Strategies Trust. We're a social impact consulting firm focusing on really bringing together the brightest minds to help our communities.
And I'm Brent Craige, founder of Newtral Groundz and co-founder of Jamron AI. And to get started with Shauna, tell me a little bit about where were you in 2005 when Katrina hit?
I was thinking about this. I was a teacher in North Carolina, and my first thought was, we need to get there. I need to be there. We have to help our community. And I felt helpless, actually, to see so many of my community not have what they need to really make out of a really horrific situation. So I was there, I was a teacher, and I just remember being too far away, I will say.
So I was actually practicing here at Children's Hospital, and I was working so hard I didn't see the news. And so my sister kept calling me, my friends kept calling me saying, what are you gonna do? And I was like, what are you talking about? So I finally turned on the television and saw a hurricane filling up half the Gulf of Mexico, and I said, well, I guess I need to go somewhere. And I took a bag and went to Houston, thinking I was gonna stay for the weekend, and didn't come home for 2 months. Wow. This is the first time I've actually talked publicly about Katrina, and it's been taking me 20 years of good therapy. But it was something to see people you know and love devastated. My patients, I saw them on TV at the convention center and was powerless to help them. But then on the other side of it, I was in Houston to receive them when they got shipped somewhere, and it was nice to say, I know your doctor personally and I can text them. It was a lot.
I was actually in New York. I was working in education publishing at the time. And like you, Maurice, I wasn't necessarily deeply tuned in. My mother had evacuated thanks to her Jamaican husband, who was like, I'm getting the hell out of here. And I'm so grateful because our neighborhood ended up being pretty flooded. So I wasn't worried, but I saw those same images, and I saw, the days pass, no rescue. I heard the narrative shift from, victims of a major natural disaster to talking about American citizens as refugees, and showing people breaking into stores to get food and describing them as looters. I think what Katrina crystallized for me was how the power of narrative and who owns it and who frames it has real deadly material consequences on real people. Yeah.
I was in college. It was we were going into our senior year. My dad is a pastor, so we were actually in Natchez, Mississippi at the time, and we had no idea. I was a senior at LSU, and there was no way to be prepared for something that you're not even informed about. As people forget, that storm was supposed to go up the coast of Florida. It went across the Panhandle and got into the Gulf and got stronger. And so my parents, I believe, they didn't get back into their house until sometime in October or November. They were stuck in Mississippi. I drove, because those backwoods, so we drove 61 and went back to college, and the population of Baton Rouge doubled overnight, right? LSU became an actual trauma center. So while we were still in school going to classes, the indoor track facility was housing patients that was being flown in. So we're seeing the dichotomy of both things happening at the same time. So it's still surreal when people talk about it and thinking about the generations that really don't even have an understanding of what took place. And so this conversation, I think, is deeply needed at this moment.
Yeah, and it's really important. When you think about the people who were affected by Hurricane Katrina, I was in 7th grade. So I was pretty much oblivious to what was going on. I thought we were going on like a little vacation. My mom said we wanted to pack up for 3 days. We wound up coming back 3 years later, so not 2 months, but moved to Houston. And it was a really, really impactful time for me, even though I was so young. And I feel like a lot of people have different stories based on where they were at their point in their life. So it's crazy to understand that you were not even there, you weren't there, y'all were just witnessing from the outside looking in. And it's a great segue into our next point, which is, how do you think Katrina affected the Black communities? And I guess I'll leave that open to whoever wants to tackle that
Sure.
first.
You know, I have never seen something so intentionally and surgically displace Black people and people of lower socioeconomic status like that disaster. Because if you had the time, space, bandwidth, money to hold out, you could do something, still pay your bills, and come back when it was time. I had the privilege of being able to stay with my uncle in Baton Rouge, fight with that terrible traffic and there being no food in the stores because everybody was up there eating it up. But I could do that and wait for potable water to come back and return to my house in the city and have a way to pay my bills. If you didn't have connections, disposable income, the ability to wait, the ability to be patient, how were you supposed to just do that? And so people went from living in a neighborhood that their family had lived in for generations to being in Montana or being in Idaho or someplace that you've seen on a map but you'd never heard of. And I think when you go on vacation, you choose to go there. Your hurricane was forced on you. Nobody chose that.
Hurricane, I never heard that.
And if I could jump, because I think your point is very much needed to be double tapped, but also expounded, because that worked if you had national banks. For those who had local banks, they didn't have access to their money. So it's a different type of economic status, right? Like you were maybe affluent, but if your bank was Hibernia or Liberty, you didn't have access. And so it forced an online banking component that did not exist, right? And so it really reshaped the Black economic social class here in Louisiana, specifically in South Louisiana. And it changed just how we viewed everyone. And I think the biggest part is realizing that policy is not always connected to poverty, and it needs to be. And so people are we're not making that connection as to what was happening at the state, federal, and local level and how that would impact them locally in order for preparation. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things.
And I would add that you have this other layer of people who are trying to take advantage of the situation. When you're already desperate. You said sort of patience, just having the cash, but also, you know, really we see it happening in the fires in Altadena where people were coming in and getting offers for just their land. And so when I come back to Katrina, come back to New Orleans, the CEO of Chemical Ventures, literally 19 years later, I was so excited to be here. And then I learned, like, there's no public school system. There are no public schools.
Yeah.
Adrinda, I know you want to talk about it.
Oh
Like,
my gosh.
insane.
I mean, there's so many threads to connect here.
Yes.
I think Katrina, if anything, is the poster child for how natural disaster is used to disrupt concentrations of Black political, economic, and in education, pedagogical power.
And medical.
Amen.
And health.
Absolutely.
You know, we have to talk about Katrina 20 years later, you have to talk about education, which is probably one of the biggest stories of transformation post-storm. And the 20 years of post-Katrina reform started with and was significantly accelerated by the mass termination of 7,500 public school staff, 4,000 teachers, the majority of them Black women. We talk about the economic impact of that. Essentially, with that move, we unemployed 5% of employed Black New Orleanians. And that particular population of educators was also very politically involved, you know, represented by a very politically active teachers union. That move, you know, really changed the face of our city politically, economically, and educationally.
And to double click on that, Shauna, let's go into the transition of economic development, because education, it breeds talent. The talent is what actually funnels the economy. So we talk a little bit about what was lost, but what is actually being built as a result of it 20 years later?
Yeah, I really love the idea of talking about the opportunity. So for Camelback, we started 10 years ago, anchored here in New Orleans, investing by giving early capital, $40,000 to entrepreneurs in education and in technology. We're national. We're intentional around still investing in the South and investing in New Orleans. And so from that, we have seen new school models come up that were started by Black founders. We also look at ways in which we can support the ecosystem. So how are we showing up even if you're not a fellow or part of our program? I believe that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, right now, entrepreneurship and building new systems, new businesses is really our way to wealth development for Black people.
For sure. And I want to talk about the reality that I did not text message before Katrina. Now, this was 2005, and everybody texts now, but I was forced to text message. That wasn't something I chose to do. And as a result, I am an older person, more comfortable with technology because I was forced to use it. Similarly, electronic medical records. When I was displaced, all of my patient records were in my office at Children's Hospital. So the hundreds of patients and families I took care of didn't have access to refills for their prescriptions, instructions for their wheelchairs, instructions for their PT, OT, or speech, because I deal with kids with disabilities. So I am now a die-hard, staunch advocate for technology and medicine. And people talk about banks and people being conservative. Medicine is conservative in that we don't adopt new things well. Yes. So out of this disaster, medicine really got a classic example of why we needed portable medical records. Yeah. Why you now can access your medical record on your phone. Okay? And that's something we take for granted 20 years later that was illustrated and forced by this disaster, Katrina.
The opportunity. What's the opportunity in the challenge?
You know, you use you're talking about technology, and it made me think about Dr. Ruha Benjamin. You know, we talk a lot about right now the need to, in education, the need to make sure our children are learning about AI, are becoming literate, right, in these new technologies. And that's right, artificial intelligence is important, but what Dr. Benjamin offers us is that ancestral intelligence is just as important. When I think about one of the biggest misses in our education story post-Katrina, it's the fact that we built a new education paradigm that thought nothing good was happening educationally in New Orleans. I'm definitely an example of the bright spots that we had in pre-Katrina public education. My very Black, very pre-Katrina public school sent me to Harvard in 1998, where I was just, you know, the only African American to matriculate that year. My point is, my story is not supposed to be possible in our rendering of what education was pre-Katrina. And what it means is that we're not pulling into the present the lessons and the strategies of how these folks did what they did, often in the face of massive state disinvestment, but somehow was able to ignite the brilliance of generations of Black children in our city. So ancestral intelligence is something that I think about as a technology we need to embrace.
I love that we have our naturally occurring social networks here. So I'm a member of Zulu Social Aid and Pleasure Club, Hail Zulu. I am King Athena 2026. And for people that don't know Mardi Gras royalty, it sounds like something extra, but those naturally occurring social networks and connectivity are what brought us back together after this disaster and things tried to rip us apart. We knew who we are and whose we are. And knowing whose you are really reaches into your point about ancestral intelligence. Because I didn't have to wonder how I would show my joy and my sadness. I know how to second line and move my feet. I didn't have to wonder who was gonna sew for me, because my Indian brothers were gonna sew hard for me when we came back to the city. And there's something reassuring about knowing what's waiting for you because you know whose you are and who you are.
Well, I know where my Zulu tickets will come from next year. So first and foremost. And I think the biggest thing in the sense of opportunity is the cross-collaboration and being able to work together once again, right? Like we sometimes forget how the Tulsas were successful, and that was being intentional about keeping things local and in your neighborhood, and going to the same doctors, having your teachers, having the like being in a space to be able to circulate your dollars, and that it didn't leave the actual neighborhood. And we're actually, what they're giving us without giving it to us is that opportunity to come back together again and realize that my brother is my brother, my sister is my sister, and they're not my enemy. And if we take that moment, we can do so much. And so I think that's one of the things I would love for us to really look at, just collectively as we leave this for the 20th anniversary. How do we get back to some of our communities and rebuilding them and taking back what was taken from us?
I think what you bring up too is like shifting from being consumer-based, which was intentional, to really being, as we are, creators and owners of our own businesses and opportunities. And so it's a mindset shift that I see happening, especially in New Orleans, but we have to actually come together. And we're intentional, for instance, at Camelback Ventures, when we do our dinners, we go to Black-owned restaurants. We're gonna take our business there, you know, that type of thing.
I love this. This is one of my easiest panels I've ever done. Because when you hear 20th anniversary of Katrina, you think, okay, this may be like a trauma panel, right? But this is more of a triumph panel where we're talking about things that we've used to navigate these disasters. And with so much going on in the world, you have the fires in California. You were telling me this morning about the flood in Texas. Like there's a flood in Texas, I don't know if y'all heard of, that is devastating Texas right now. We provide the framework for how these issues get dealt with. So to transition, and y'all just gave me a lot of good examples, I want y'all to hone in on what are some tips that you have for someone that may have just got displaced yesterday and they don't know what to do. I know it's 2025, 20 years later, but what is some advice that y'all have for people who are going to be future, I would say, future leaders in the space of disaster recovery?
I'll jump in that. In one of our roles in another capacity, we do a lot of rapid response for this. And I think it really goes into understanding who's already on the ground. There are people who are doing work to benefit the community and who are equipped to position themselves to receive resources to help others. So figuring out who are those organizations and be able to turn to them because they're going to know where the direct needs is. We are so eager to always give to the big 4 or 5 organizations where the money doesn't always trickle down. And so it still goes back to the economic impact and what are the local organizations that are able to say, that person actually needs some water, that person needs some bread. We don't need clothes right now. We need to figure out how do we resettle that land or figure out what is the space for that home, or let's get this church back up because there was a food pantry and these people know to go here to receive that, like as opposed to just trying to parachute in and save the day. It's really figuring out who was already there doing the work, who's still doing the work, who was not impacted, because not everybody's going to be impacted, and being able to lift those up who are not impacted so that they can be best positioned to be the strong warriors in that space.
You know, I just want to, say that and acknowledge how tender this year is, as you just said, for this whole city, right? There are 1 million Katrina stories, and many of them continue to be deeply painful. It lives in your body, the trauma. And educationally, certainly, this year there is an attempt, I think, to paint an overly rosy narrative, right, about where we are. Progress does need to be celebrated. There has been some made, but we are still a city where the vast majority of Black children are not reading, don't have basic literacy skills by the 3rd grade, and there is still a 50% achievement gap between Black and white children. And so we do have a lot of work to do. One of the biggest lessons I think we've learned educationally is that it matters who's in the room. As you're thinking about rebuilding these systems, it matters that you have some sort of context about the history and culture of the community that you're about to work in. For example, in education, we completely ignored the role of 141 years of racism in addressing our education challenges. And so we fired the teachers, which was not the right solution. So in short, it's echoing your point about being curious about what's there, being curious about why what's there, right, looks the way it does or doesn't, and then being willing to invest in indigenous models and indigenous solutions.
You know, I really, really love the points that you all are making. And as a scientist, so I'm an MD, PhD, arts matter. Arts matter, and I'm gonna say it again, arts matter. The reason arts matter in trauma is it gives you a way to express what you're feeling when you don't have the words. You can't prepare for something you've never experienced in some ways. Like I can have a go bag, and I encourage everybody here to know where your marriage certificate is, your birth certificate is, your insurance policy, and have that in a go bag like you were getting ready to go to the hospital to have a baby. You want to have that ready for you. So part of this starts with preparation. But when things happen to you, what I find was most critical, not just for those that are resilient enough to be able to wait like I did to come back in 2 months when they could, or the people that were wading through the water, there needs to be a process for you to tell your story, have your story validated, and process your story. So shout out to the mental health professionals out there that were available to help pick us up and put us back together. Shout out to the systems of people that said, I might be all over the country, but I'm still here for you. And I ask people to lean into their community. My mama worried me to death after Katrina, so I gave her a job. She got to worry FEMA to get me my FEMA response money. And it gave her something to do, and it gave me material help. You know, and I think that's an example of how you let people love on you in a way that's helpful.
Yeah, in addition to being CEO of Camelback Ventures, I'm also co-founder of Onyx Black Wealth Collective. And the reason we started is because we recognized that we just weren't sharing information with each other. Like, being aware, just knowing what you don't know. And for me, it's like, I did not know how to actually build wealth. And when I'm coming back to New Orleans, 20 years later, I am in awe of what has been done here. I am in awe of how much success we have had. And I think about what we can do next. And so, as disturbing as it is to go through many things as Black people, especially right now, these systems around us were not built for us. They were not built for us. And so we're thinking about how do we use the next 10 years to set up the next 100 years of legacy. So I say for right now, being aware, taking the time, ensuring all your stuff is in order, and then the joy that Black people have every single day. What I love about New Orleans, it doesn't matter what's going on, we're gonna laugh, we're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna still make shit happen.
Yep.
And I would say what I would give advice to is understanding the narrative, controlling your own narrative. When Hurricane Katrina hit, this was not the information age that we're in today. We did not have, I think MySpace wasn't even around during that time. Email, like you said, text messages just started rolling in. And there was a lot of news, a lot of information that was misinformation. And it caused a lot of turmoil within a lot of different communities. So when it comes to us controlling our own narrative, one of the big reasons why the Global Black Economic Forum is so important is because it's about controlling the Black narrative. And if we control that narrative, we will be more prepared when things happen so that we can keep the information in a silo to where we can actually benefit from it. So we have around 2 minutes left. I want everyone to kind of just give me your tip on how do you think we could control our narrative better, not just for disaster preparedness, but just for education, economic development, communications. How do y'all think we do that?
Well, as the elder on the panel here, I think the way you do it is you make room for everybody to learn the new skills. I am able to tell my stories because I can work the Twitter. I can tell, I'm learning my stories. I'm terrible at TikTok, but I'm trying. And I say this because there are stories that only I can tell, but if I don't tell it in the medium that people are receiving the information, they'll never learn it. So I really believe in cross-generational togetherness and making sure nobody's left behind. People are not expendable.
I don't know, we might be going in order of age, but I'm not gonna say anything. But anyway, I think you have to tell your story. I agree with you. I spent a lot of time head down working, thinking that someone was gonna find my story, and it wasn't happening. So we have to take the time to tell the stories that we know we want everyone to know about what we're doing here in New Orleans and Black people.
I think how we frame the story and who frames the story is deeply important. When it comes to education, for example, we all want our schools to be great. We all want them to be high quality spaces for every child. But we often look at schools and we knock them for the struggles that they're having about academic achievement. They should be accountable, no doubt about it. But we are less curious about, did they have the resources to invest in professional development? Did they have the resources to invest in high quality educational materials, after school tutoring programs, et cetera, et cetera? And the fact remains there's a lot of resource inequity that continues in our system that makes it tougher for some schools to do what they need to do and easier for others. And so I think how we frame the narrative, how we ask and what we use and sort of contextualize around the questions that we are struggling with really matters. And I think that's something that Katrina taught us for sure.
Real quickly, we out of time, but give me answer.
Yes, I would say that being mindful of this city, what's happening this year outside of the 20th anniversary as we enter an election that will shape the next city. Power is not a dirty word. We all have it, and we have the opportunity to utilize it and embrace it. And so it is also our duty to recognize the power we have, and that power allows us to hire people and to fire people. And be mindful of those who represent us or who claim to represent us and what that looks like, right? And so as we're thinking about these next couple years and how that impacts and where the dollars are flowing and the cultural barriers and how we want to tell stories and all of that, it's all connected in every shape and fashion. There is a local election here. That matters. Be mindful of the candidates, what they say, how they show up, when they're showing up. In what capacity they're showing up. And this is from the mayor all the way down to the city council. And be earnest in how you invoke and use your power.
And that is our panel. Thank y'all so much for joining us. And yeah, this is good. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you, Global Economic Forum. Thank you, Essence Fest. And we'll carry on for the rest of the show.